She hadn't drank water in days until a human heard her cry. The crystal wastes of Keth 9 stretched like a frozen ocean of glass, each shard reflecting the pale light of a dying star. Lieutenant Jackson Vale trudged through the razor-sharp terrain, his boots crunching on fragments that once powered an entire mining operation. The war had ended 8 months ago, but peace felt like a foreign concept in places like this, abandoned, forgotten, left to die slowly under an alien sun. His recon mission was simple: catalog remaining resources, check for survivor settlements, file a report that no one would read. Officially. Unofficially, he was running from the silence that followed victory, the kind of silence that echoed with ghost voices of fallen comrades, with orders that still made his hands shake in the dark. The crystalline formations grew larger as he ventured deeper into the waste, some towering like frozen trees, others forming natural archways that sang in the wind. It was beneath one of these formations that he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the crystal chimes. A voice. Broken. Desperate. They'll high. Jackson froze, hand moving, instinctively to his sidearm. The war might be over, but this sector had seen some of the worst fighting. Survivors could be dangerous, desperate, or worse, bait for an ambush. But something in that voice made him pause. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't threatening. It was pleading. He followed the sound around a cluster of blue-white crystal spires, and his breath caught in his throat. There, huddled in the shadow of a massive geode formation, were 2 figures. Alien. Vorthak, by their distinctive scaled skin that shifted from deep purple to silver in the light. A woman lay unconscious against the crystal wall, her breathing shallow and labored. Beside her sat a child, small, maybe 6 years old in human terms, whose large, luminous eyes were fixed on him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. The child's lips moved again, cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Thelhai. Water. The universal need. Jackson's training screamed caution. Vorthak had been enemy combatants during the Rim Wars. Protocol demanded he report their position, let command decide their fate. But looking at this child, this dying child, Protocol felt like a relic from a war that should have taught them all better lessons. He knelt slowly, hands visible, and pulled out his water canteen. The child's eyes widened, tracking the movement like it was the most precious thing in the universe. Easy, Jackson said softly, though he knew she probably couldn't understand him. He held out the canteen, but she didn't take it. Instead, she pointed to the unconscious woman with a trembling hand. Mira, she whispered, the name carrying the weight of everything she had left to lose. Jackson understood. He'd seen enough death to recognize the signs. The woman was hours, maybe less, from complete organ failure. He cradled her head gently and brought the water to her lips, letting drops fall slowly onto her parched mouth. Some color returned to her scales, and she stirred slightly. Only then did the child drink, and even then, just small sips, as if she'd learned that resources were never guaranteed. "What's your name?" Jackson asked, activating his universal translator. "Zira," she replied, her voice like wind chimes. "Are you going to hurt us?" The question hit him harder than enemy fire ever had. "No," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'm going to help you." He looked at his scanner, calculating distances to his hidden shelter in the caverns. It would be dangerous carrying them both, but leaving them here meant certain death. As he gathered Mira in his arms, Zira slipped her small hand into his. For the first time since the war ended, Jackson felt like he had a mission that mattered. The crystal wastes sang around them as they began their journey towards something that might, eventually, become home. The descent into the crystal caverns took 3 hours, each step a careful negotiation with gravity and hope. Jackson's hidden bunker lay 2 kilometers beneath the surface, carved from living rock and reinforced with salvaged military-grade materials. He'd built it during the final months of the war, a sanctuary for a soldier who'd seen too much, needed too much silence. Mira stirred only once during the journey, her scaled hand gripping his jacket with surprising strength before consciousness slipped away again. Zira followed without question, her small feet finding purchase on ledges that would challenge grown men. She moved with the fluid grace of her people, adapted to harsh environments and harder choices. The bunker's entrance was hidden behind a curtain of hanging crystals, their natural formation concealing the steel doorway he'd welded into place months ago. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in soft amber, revealing a space that was functional rather than comfortable. A military cot, storage lockers, water recycling systems humming quietly in the corner, and a comm array he hadn't used since going AWOL. Jackson laid Mira on the cot and activated the medical scanner he'd appropriated from a field hospital. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion, but nothing irreversible. Not yet. He started an IV drip, the precious fluids flowing into her system like liquid hope. Zira stood at the edge of the room, silent and watchful. She'd accepted his help, but trust was a different currency entirely. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a folding chair. She remained standing. He tried a different approach, pulling out a meal ration and warming it over his compact heating unit. The smell of processed protein and vegetables filled the small space. Not appetizing, but nutritious. He placed it on the floor between them and sat cross-legged, eating from his own portion with exaggerated casualness. After several minutes, hunger won over caution. Zira crept forward and sat across from him, her movements precise and economical. She ate slowly, testing each bite as if it might be her last. "How long?" he asked when she'd finished half the meal. She understood without translation. 6 days, maybe 7. The water ran out first. "Where were you going?" "Away." The word carried the weight of refugee status, of lives upended by forces beyond their control. "The peace treaties, they don't apply to everyone." Jackson nodded grimly. He'd seen the fine print, the clauses that left gray areas where people like Mira and Zira could fall through the cracks. Unregistered civilians, non-combatants without proper documentation, forgotten people in a universe trying to forget its recent cruelties. "You're safe here," he said. Zira's luminous eyes studied his face with unsettling intensity. "Why? We're nothing to you. Less than nothing. You're alive," he interrupted. "That's enough." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. She resumed eating, and for the first time since he'd found them, she didn't check the exits every few seconds. Over the next 2 days, patterns emerged. Jackson would wake to find Zira sitting beside her mother's cot, humming soft melodies in her native tongue. The song seemed to help. Mira's color improved, her breathing steadied. When she finally woke on the 3rd day, her first word was her daughter's name. "Zira, I'm here, Mama." The child's composure cracked for the first time, tears streaming down her scaled cheeks as she pressed her face against her mother's hand. Mira's eyes found Jackson across the room. She said something in rapid Vorthak, then switched to accented standard. "She says you gave us water when we had none, that you carried us to safety." Her voice was stronger than he'd expected, carrying an authority that suggested she'd once been someone important. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Mira said firmly. "They wouldn't have. We've learned that lesson too many times." That evening, Mira was strong enough to sit up and share a proper meal. Jackson found himself talking, really talking for the first time in months. About the war, about the silence that followed, about building this place as an escape from memories that wouldn't fade. "And now?" Mira asked. He looked around the bunker that had been his solitary refuge, now warmed by 2 additional presences. Zira had fallen asleep in the chair, her head pillowed on her arms, finally relaxed enough to truly rest. "Now I think maybe I built it for the wrong reasons," he said. "Or maybe the right reasons, just not the ones I thought." Mira smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from either of them. Sometimes the heart knows what it needs before the mind catches up. Outside, the crystal formations sang their eternal songs, but inside the bunker, 3 strangers were becoming something else. something that felt suspiciously like the family Jackson had never let himself want. 2 weeks in the caverns transformed routines into rituals, strangers into something approaching family. Jackson had expanded the living space, carving out a second sleeping area from the soft crystal walls. The bunker hummed with quiet activity: water, recyclers churning, air scrubbers maintaining atmosphere, and underneath it all, the sound of voices that had learned to trust each other. Mira had regained her strength with surprising speed. Her scales now gleamed with health, shifting from deep amethyst to silver as her moods changed. She'd begun helping with maintenance tasks, her long fingers surprisingly adept at rewiring circuits and calibrating sensors. In the evenings, she would sit by the comm array, not to send messages but to listen to the static between frequencies. Audiobook meditation she'd practiced since childhood. Zira bloomed like a flower finding sunlight. Her laughter echoed off crystal walls as she explored every corner of their underground sanctuary. She'd claimed a small alcove as her own, decorating it with interesting crystal formations and sketches drawn on salvaged datapads. But it was her other changes that both fascinated and concerned Jackson. The child could sense things: water sources through solid rock, equipment failures before they happened, emotional states that others tried to hide. Her luminous eyes would sometimes glow brighter in the dark, and when she touched the crystal formations, they sang in harmonies that shouldn't have been possible. "She's always been sensitive," Mira explained one morning as they watched Zira coax music from a cluster of resonant crystals. "But this place it's amplifying her gifts." "Is that dangerous?" Jackson asked, though he already suspected the answer. For her? No. For those who might want to use her abilities? Mira's scales darkened with worry. Everything is dangerous for our kind now. That afternoon, Jackson began teaching Zira practical skills: how to read environmental scanners, basic electronics, emergency protocols. She absorbed everything with startling speed, her questions revealing an intellect that had been sharpened by necessity. "Why did you become a soldier?" she asked while helping him clean the water filtration system. Jackson paused, considering how to answer. "I wanted to protect people, keep them safe from harm." Did it work? The simple question cut deeper than complex philosophical debates. Sometimes. Not always. Not enough. Zira nodded gravely, as if she understood concepts that should have been beyond her years. "Mama says protection isn't about being strong, it's about being there when someone needs you. Your mother's wise." She's sad, though. I can feel it even when she smiles. Zira's eyes met his with unsettling directness. "You're sad too. But different. Sad. Guilty sad." Jackson set down his tools, unsure how to respond to such naked perception. Sad gets smaller when we're all together," Zira continued. "Maybe that's how healing works. We share the weight until it's light enough to carry." That evening, Mira found him sitting at the bunker's small observation port, staring up through layers of crystal at the distant stars. She settled beside him without speaking, her presence a comfortable weight in the amber-lit darkness. "She asks hard questions," he said finally. "She's seen hard answers. But she still believes in good things. In good people." Mira's hand found his scaled fingers intertwining with calloused human ones. "I'm starting to believe again, too." The touch sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with body heat. When had he started noticing the graceful line of her neck, the way her eyes reflected light like captured starfire? When had her smile become something he looked forward to each morning? "Mira," he began, then stopped, unsure how to voice feelings that felt both impossible and inevitable. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too. This thing growing between us. Is it wrong? Everything else in my life has been torn away. My home, my people, my certainty about the future. But this, with you, it feels like the first right thing in years." Before he could respond, Zira appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Are you watching for shooting stars? Mama used to say they were messages from people who loved us." Come here, little star, Mira said, opening her arms. Zira settled between them, her small body warm against their sides. Look, she whispered, pointing upward. A meteor streaked across the narrow slice of visible sky, brilliant and brief. Someone's thinking about us. Jackson wrapped his arms around both of them, feeling something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before. Not the desperate need to protect born from duty, but the quiet certainty of belonging, of home being not a place, but people who chose to stay. Make a wish, Zira instructed. Jackson closed his eyes and wished for time. Time for this fragile happiness to take root. Time to learn how to be the man these two extraordinary beings seemed to think he could become. Time for love to grow in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silence between words, in the safety of crystal caves where broken things could learn to be whole again. Above them, the meteor's light faded, but the warmth remained. When the past returns. The first sign of trouble came through Zira's dreams. She woke screaming 3 nights running, her luminous eyes wide with terror as she described ships like dark insects descending from stars. Mira held her daughter close, whispering comfort in their native tongue. But even her touch couldn't chase away visions that felt too real to be mere nightmares. They're coming, Zira whispered on the 4th morning, her small hands gripping Jackson's sleeve. The hunters. They found our trail. Jackson activated the bunker's passive sensors, scanning the crystal wastes above. Nothing. But he'd learned to trust the child's instincts. They'd kept her and Mira alive when logic had failed them. How long, he asked. Zira closed her eyes, her breathing shallow as she reached out with senses he didn't understand. Soon. Maybe today. They're angry. Someone important wants us found. Mira's scales shifted to deep indigo, the color of Vorthak fear. The Purification Corps. They were disbanded after the peace accords, but some cells went underground. They believe any alien survivor is a future threat. Jackson felt the familiar weight of combat preparation settling over him, checking weapons, reviewing tactical options, calculating odds. But this wasn't a military engagement. This was protection of family, and the stakes felt infinitely higher. The bunker's defensible, he said, more to reassure himself than them. We have supplies, weapons, communication arrays if we need to call for help. No. Mira's voice was firm. They have tracking equipment, orbital support. If they've found us, running is our only option. I won't run anymore, Jackson said quietly. This is our home. I won't let them take it. Before Mira could respond, alarms began wailing. The motion sensors he'd placed throughout the crystal formations were triggering in sequence, a coordinated approach from multiple vectors, professional, military. On the main display screen, dark figures moved through the crystalline maze above, their movements too precise to be anything but trained soldiers. 12 contacts armed with military-grade weapons and scanning equipment. Zira pressed against the observation port, her eyes beginning to glow with that inner light that appeared when her abilities manifested strongest. They're not just here to capture us, she said, her voice oddly calm. They're here to make an example, to show others what happens to those who help our kind. A voice crackled through the comm system, cold, amplified, carrying the authority of absolute certainty. Vorthak refugees and human collaborator, you are harboring enemies of the peace accords. Surrender now and face judgment, or be eliminated as continued threats to human security. Mira pulled Zira away from the window. They're using old war rhetoric. They don't see us as beings, just problems to be solved. Jackson sealed the bunker's main entrance and activated defensive systems he'd hoped never to use. Energy barriers hummed to life, turning crystal formations into fortified positions. Then we remind them that some problems fight back. The first assault came at noon. Plasma charges melted through the outer crystal formations, but the deeper they penetrated, the more the cavern's natural acoustics worked against them. Their weapons fire created feedback loops that disoriented attackers while leaving the bunker's occupants unaffected. But they kept coming, methodical, and relentless. Papa, Zira said quietly, the name she'd started using more frequently slipping out naturally. I can stop them, but you might not like how. Jackson knelt beside her. What do you mean? The crystals, they're not just pretty rocks. They're alive, ancient, and they remember when this world was green. Her eyes now blazed with silver fire. I can wake them up, all of them. Mira caught Jackson's arm. If she does this, there's no going back. They'll know what she is, what she can become. Every faction in the galaxy will hunt us. Another explosion shook the bunker. Cracks appeared in the walls they'd called home. How many more will die if we do nothing? Zira asked. How many more families will be scattered because people are too afraid to stand up to the hunters? Jackson looked at this child who'd become his daughter, this woman who'd become his heart, and felt the soldier in him make way for something larger. Not duty to command or country, but duty to love itself. Do it, he said. Zira placed her small hands against the crystal wall and closed her eyes. The change began slowly, a soft humming that grew into a harmonic resonance that seemed to come from the planet's core. The crystal formations throughout the caverns began to glow, their light pulsing in rhythm with Zira's heartbeat. Above them, the attacking soldiers stopped their advance as the very ground began to sing. Crystal spires rose from barren earth, their surfaces reflecting and amplifying emotion. Fear became terror, aggression became confusion, hatred became nothing. Simply dissolved in the face of something too beautiful and ancient to comprehend. One by one, weapons dropped from nerveless fingers. The soldiers stumbled backward, their tactical formation breaking apart as they fled toward their ships. Only their leader remained, his voice crackling over the comm one final time. This isn't over. The core will return in greater numbers. Zira opened her eyes, now blazing with starlight. No, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystals sing louder. They won't. Because now the stones themselves will remember what happened here, and they'll tell others. The galaxy will know that some places are protected by more than weapons. As silence returned to the crystal wastes, Jackson gathered his family close. They were no longer hidden, no longer safe in anonymity, but they were together, and somehow that felt like victory enough. Where love takes root 6 months after the crystal awakening, the caverns had transformed into something unprecedented, a sanctuary that drew the lost and desperate from across 3 sectors. What began as one man's hidden bunker had grown into an underground city, carved from living crystal, its chambers humming with the voices of those who'd found refuge in the singing stones. Jackson stood on the observation deck he'd built into the highest cavern, watching the morning light filter through crystal formations that now pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. Below him, the settlement bustled with quiet activity. Former soldiers tended hydroponic gardens alongside refugee families. Engineers worked beside healers, their different species united by the simple recognition that survival meant cooperation. Thy council's waiting for you, Mira said, joining him at the railing. Her scales had taken on new patterns since settling here, silver threads that caught the crystal light like captured starfire. She wore robes woven from fiber crystal hybrids that Zira had learned to cultivate, practical yet beautiful. Let them. Wait a little longer, Jackson replied, pulling her close. I want to remember this moment. Nervous about the ceremony, he laughed, the sound echoing off the singing walls. Terrified. I faced enemy fire, orbital bombardments, court-martial proceedings. But the thought of standing up there and promising to love you forever? That's the scariest thing I've ever contemplated. Mira's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of long practice. Good thing you've had practice keeping impossible promises. Their wedding had been planned by the entire community, a celebration that would bind not just 2 hearts but symbolize the union of species, the possibility of peace built on understanding rather than conquest. Representatives from 12 different worlds had requested permission to attend, drawn by stories of the Crystal Sanctuary. where love had literally transformed stone into song. "Are you ready?" Zira's voice carried from the chamber entrance. She'd grown in the past months, not just physically, but in the mysterious ways her people measured maturity. Her abilities had stabilized into something magnificent: the capacity to communicate with the planet's crystalline network, to encourage growth and healing wherever her influence touched. She wore ceremonial robes of deep blue crystal silk, her role as the settlement's youngest council member marked by the delicate circlet of living crystal that adorned her brow. But to Jackson, she would always be the frightened child he'd found in the wasteland, the daughter who'd taught him that family was a choice made daily, with open hands and willing hearts. "As ready as I'll ever be," he said, straightening his formal uniform, not military dress but the simple robes that marked him as a protector of the sanctuary. The ceremony took place in the grand chamber, where the largest crystal formation rose like a natural cathedral toward the cavern's peak. Hundreds of beings filled the space: human refugees, Vorthak families, Zelhari traders, species Jackson couldn't even name, all drawn together by the promise of a place where difference was celebrated rather than feared. Elder Thane, the settlement's first council leader and a former enemy general, performed the binding ritual. His words carried across the crystal formations, which amplified them into harmonies that spoke to every species present in frequencies they could understand. "Love," he said, his scarred face gentle in the crystal light, "is the only force in the universe that grows stronger when shared. Today we witness not just the union of two hearts, but the strengthening of bonds that hold our community together. It came time for vows. Jackson's voice almost failed him, but Mira's eyes, luminous with tears and starlight, gave him strength. "I promise to be your shelter when storms come," he said, "to share my water when wells run dry, to stand between you and anything that would harm our family, our home, our future." Mira's response came in two languages, first in the liquid syllables of her native tongue, then in standard for all to understand. "I promise to be your compass when paths grow unclear, to share my strength when burdens grow heavy, to walk beside you into whatever tomorrow brings, knowing that love makes all journeys possible." When they kissed, the crystals sang, a harmony so pure it brought tears to eyes across species barriers. And in that moment the entire cavern pulsed with bioluminescent joy, as if the planet itself approved of this union. The celebration lasted 3 days, but it was the quiet moments after that Jackson treasured most. He and Mira in their expanded quarters, Zira curled between them as they watched stars through the crystal ceiling. A family that had grown from desperation into something precious and permanent. "What are you thinking about?" Mira asked, her head pillowed on his shoulder. "The future," he replied. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm not afraid of it." "Papa," Zira mumbled sleepily. "The crystals are dreaming about rain." And indeed, as if summoned by her words, the first drops began to fall on the surface above. Water that would nurture the seeds they'd planted, the life they'd chosen to build together. In the crystal caverns of Keth 9, love had taken root in the most unlikely soil, and like all growing things, it reached toward light, toward hope, toward a tomorrow where the word family could encompass any heart brave enough to remain open. The sanctuary song continued long into the night, a lullaby for dreamers and a promise for those still searching for home.